It took me such a long time to balance and acknowledge it's okay to acknowledge the adventure. It's okay to acknowledge I did over 10,000 performances and 300 different roles. It's also finally okay to acknowledge without feeling like I was judging that there were some definite flaws.
Hi, I'm Katie, and I am the host of the Epic Kate podcast. I'm happy to welcome you to an episode that is very special to me because it is one of a few I've had so far with fellow Covenant players. For those of you that don't know, Covenant Players was a repertory theater company. It's not really operating anymore. I've had a few people on my podcast that I've traveled with, that I've had personal experiences with, and the response of them has been so powerful that I thought I should reach out to people that I don't know, that were in long before me or before I was born, and give other people a chance to tell their stories. To just really dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly for the purpose of collective healing, for the purpose of telling the story that never got to be told. Things changed a lot from the way the organization was run in the 80s to when I joined in the early 2000s. So it was really interesting for us to compare our experiences as well. I thought now would be a good time to give a brief kind of overview of some of the phrases and expressions and Covenant player lingo that was used so that you don't feel too lost. I can put a timestamp on YouTube as well if anybody wants to skip that because they already know it very well. One of the things that's mentioned is died October 20th. It's a play that is very well known to many people in this ministry. Because what we did was theater. We were a theater company. And Died October 20th is a play where there's an angel and a devil and a person who is kind of asleep, but they talk to his unconscious self, or her, depending on the unit configuration. And they're trying to convince the person, like, the devil's saying, "You're coming with me because you're about to die." And the angel's like, "No, we have to stop this. This isn't, you've faked this somehow." I don't need to tell you the entire play, but that's the basics of it. CPCC was mentioned, and what that is Covenant Player Covenant College. And that is the nickname for the training time that was held twice a year. In America, it's held in California. In Germany, it was held in Europe. It was held in Germany, where the offices were. And it was a very intense time. It was a very intense time of learning plays, taking classes, doing crews, cooking meals, watching each other's kids. Just all hands on deck all the time to get things done. Playdate, that is what we called our performances, PD, Playdate. Yeah, which is kind of funny in the mom world where that is about kids getting together, but, you know, every organization has their special little words. A tour, we mentioned tours. Those are the amounts of time that we were on the road. Usually it was a 4.5-month mission, so 2 4.5-month missions every year, with the training times and vacation break times between that. PNG is something that is mentioned, and as I said later on in the episode, this was not a concept that I was taught when I was in, but it was something that happened to people where if they left the ministry, they were labeled persona non grata, and that meant that they were not welcome back. They were not allowed to participate in things. Kind of shunning. Another thing that was mentioned was sashes and medallions, and that's a part of the Covenant player culture. Sashes were these pieces of fabric worn across your shoulder to commemorate spiritual growth, achievements such as how many performances you've done, or how many roles you've learned, or how many roles you've learned in different languages. If you're interested in that, I have a YouTube video on my vlog channel I can link to in the description, and that talks about it. And Morton and I, my husband and I, share our sashes. The medallions are something that you receive when you join the organization and you make your commitment. When I joined, it was a 2-year commitment, and it was understood that these necklaces that say C and P, and they have a whole story about them. They were only designated for people who were full-time in the ministry, and once you left, you were supposed to return them. So we mentioned Chuck. Chuck was the founder, writer, head cheese, I don't know why I said that, of the organization. And when she was in, he was referred to as CMT, his initials for Charles M. Tanner. But when I was around, even though he passed away shortly after my very first tour, he was always referred to as Chuck. Yeah, I think that about covers it. We can go ahead and jump into the episode. I'll see you at the end of the conversation to share some more thoughts and connect with you some more.
Heartfelt conversations can change the world. Here's the Epic Kate podcast.
Hi, Sheri.
I
So could you please tell us what years you were in, how old you were when you joined, and how old you were when you left?
Hi, my name is Sheri Ricci. You all might have known me as Sherry Khan. I joined in August of 1980 when Covenant Players was at one of its largest. There were roughly 600 to 800 of us. At that time, I served from 1980 through 1985. I had just graduated high school. I was 17. Uh, I turned 18 a month uh, into tour because training was in the middle of August. And so I was born and raised in California, Northern California, uh, San Jose, Greater Bay Area. And I saw them at Cupertino Church of the Nazarene, where I had begun to go 2 years prior, um, when my dad uh, married my stepmom, who was attending that church, and invited us to go.
Hmm.
And I saw them, was so moved. Back then, I saw died October 20th. Um, yes, I saw others, but I'll never forget the impact or the ability to play all three parts in later years. And
Hmm.
so I went through the process and went through the 2 weeks of, I forget the phrase, was Hell Week. They definitely had phrases for
Did
that
they
2 week training period.
did they
And
not
all,
call it CPCC?
yes, CPCC. And that was the beginning of living out of a suitcase in faith.
Yeah, and it's such a neat experience meeting other former Covenant players because we have so many things in common, even though we were separated by decades. We still can spout off lines of plays because we had to repeat them so many times to learn them. And
Absolutely.
just the culture in general. So I'm curious, like 600 to 800 people, that must have been so intense. Did you see much of Chuck, or did you meet him much?
Um, so the way it worked in those years, especially in my first two trainings in August and then again in January, he would spend a couple of hours in totality with the new recruits and give them a speech and a rah, rah, rah. Newt Rockney kind of thing. But we were assigned mentors
Mm-hmm.
that were kind of, I won't say in charge, but for lack of a better word, in charge, making sure that we, got to where we needed to be. Bubba, God rest his soul, who just passed, was one of my mentors. Jay
Mm.
Atman, Jerry Lynn's husband, was one of my mentors. Jerry Lynn was one of my mentors. Walt Bauer. These are people I thank God for our Facebook group, because even though we haven't seen each other in decades, we still stay connected. Don and David Ingram. Uh, there were just so many. And because we were so large, CMT was like, for better or for worse, was kind of untouchable
Mm.
unless you were in the in crowd.
Right. Was it a bit, did it ever make you a bit uncomfortable, the veneration of this guy?
Without sounding judgmental, because I know it's about to be, I felt that he and way too many people in upper management, for lack of a better word, um, put him on a pedestal he didn't belong on.
Mm.
Uh,
I mean, it we are all just people at the end of the day. Like it's nothing judgmental to say we're all people, and he had a gift of writing, but yeah.
he
Uh,
did have a gift of writing.
but what's
Uh,
that expression like? Absolute power corrupts.
yes, and it did kind of go down, with Bobby JT. Mark was a little bit better about it. Suzanne was a little better about it, and Robin and Christina. But
Robin
Bob,
Gettle's one of the most grounded people you'll ever meet.
oh, I
Yeah.
I still see that little. I'll always remember it. And I'm 62 now. I was 17, 18, 19, 20. Uh, Robin was a special man. But Chuck, or as we knew him as CMT, uh, that it was his way or the highway. It felt more like a dictatorship than a community of people. I
Oh.
belong to a community of people now. I have two of the most humbled pastors on the planet, and I think that's rare. Was Chuck gifted? Absolutely. But you couldn't agree to disagree.
Mm.
And if you weren't in the in crowd, whether it was training or during the summer, when we would, have the summer stock, um, he wasn't, we weren't worth his time.
Mm. Did you ever make any commitment for a certain amount of time?
I did. So, back then when you joined, it was for 1 year or two tours, which were roughly 5.5 months each. Get a couple weeks off at Christmas, go back in January. Um, so I did the first year. The first year, I also agreed to do a 6 week summer tour, um, which was absolutely fantastic. Um, I hate the fact that I don't remember every person I toured with, but I do have other people that I mentioned before: Jerry Lynn, Walt Bauer, who was the biggest teddy bear on planet Earth. Um, the summer tour was, we did some churches, but mostly it was the summer camps, where the kids would go. Um,
Mm.
I could never have done what I did had I not joined CP. I traveled. Born and raised in California my whole life. Most I'd ever been to is like Tahoe, Nevada. And to go to some of the places that I was fortunate enough to go. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I feel that. I never would have made it out of the US if it wasn't for it. I wouldn't have met my Swedish husband and be living here
uh,
now. Like,
and I was in Europe for a time as well. My first tour with Jill and all that. Ooh, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. I was so disappointed. I wanted to go back east. But the thing I treasure most from that tour was at that time, from the 70s, there was a couple named David and Janet Bowman,
Mm.
and they lived and worked at Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Oh,
I have walked in and out and stayed at that ranch. How many people get to do that?
yeah.
Um, I was 18 at that time because it was my first tour and my birthday's in September.
Mhm.
It's things like that that I treasure. It's to a degree the excitement of what's coming next.
Oh, yeah.
You
Just
know,
you get addicted to seeing the scenery change and seeing the
the
next bedroom.
scenery, the how are we going to make it? And back then, it was rare we didn't walk into an area where we already didn't have 3 to 5 play dates. And it was mostly about getting ready for the next tour while, studying uh,
Mhm.
for whatever, whether we had split play dates or things like that. Drama has always been my thing since elementary school. Uh, Also, singing. I did do a Catalyst tour a little bit later. Um, but it was the drama, it was the sink yourself in to being anybody but yourself.
You
And
mentioned died October 20th. Like my favorite thing is to play the devil. Like I would play it really like I'm not that kind of person, so I would play it the super seductive and and confident, powerful person. I was like, oh, it feels so good to embody that.
I loved opposite of Jerry Lynn Hansen at the time, Jerry Lynn Atman, her devil. My goodness, I loved Patera.
Oh.
I felt I did the angel. I've done the devil. The devil was fun. The angel was hard for me. To really, I was such a young Christian at the time to really take on that embodiment of that 1000% confidence and faith. Um, I was more the Patera, the
Mm.
doubter, the questioner. Is this really going to be? Um, in some of the craziest places. Um, in Texas during that first tour, one of the most meaningful wasn't the men's prison, it was the women's.
Mm.
And being acutely aware we were in this giant auditorium and the guards walking with the guns. I was 18 years old and I'm like looking up there going, here's hoping. But it was that adrenaline,
Mm.
of those are the things that I will treasure forever.
What's
You
really
know,
cool to think of is that, so for those of you who don't know, maybe there's some curious people from that knew a Covenant player in their life or whatever, but we had a system of organization playdate cards. Um, and they were in little pieces, little, what is the word I'm looking for? Like recipe cards, basically. Back in your day, you had to type them up. In my day, we just wrote on them, and then we transitioned to putting them all into the computer. I
oh
think
my
some,
goodness, no, everything was by hand. We
yeah,
had
yeah.
Rolodexes.
So
We had
you didn't type on the cards?
we typed on the cards. We had to put in our notes. We had what we called play date reports,
Yep, yep, yep.
and 8.5 by 11 carbon. And so the unit leaders um, would most of the time they did the play date reports. We would, as we PR'd public relations, and whether it was, pounding the streets or making phone calls, we're the ones that would have to keep updated. And I mean, we had boxes.
Yeah, and it's just really neat to think of when we were looking at these cards and like, whoa, they had a play date in '88. Whoa, what plays did they do in 1979? And So it's like I held cards or I looked at data in the computer. That was you.
Oh,
That was your
wow.
team.
And I never knew they went computerized.
Yeah, it took a while. Holy cow. We did so much data entry.
You know, one of my favorite things, it sounds so silly, but it just dawned on me when we used to call in and check in at the home office for whatever reason. We needed something, we had a question, responding to something, and how we would do the call the operator because we had payphones. Okay. We had payphones back then. Cell phones were barely coming out. We certainly couldn't afford them. And we would ask for Stanley Blodgett.
Oh.
Um, and they'd say, well, Stanley's not here right now. May I take your name and number? And then, of course, they would call us back because that's the way that we didn't have to spend a ton of money in a payphone or worse, have a host pay for a long distance phone call. And so each tour, my first tour, and that's why I remember, we were Stanley Blodgett. Each tour, each unit was given a character from a play. This is who you ask for when you dial the operator.
So
And
that they know that you're okay.
well, yeah, and they would know, oh, okay, this particular unit, we were the Southwest unit,
Mm-hmm.
and they would know, okay, somebody's got a question. I'm sorry, Stanley's not here right now, but if you give me your name and number, I'll give him the message. And within a few minutes, somebody from corporate would call us back.
Oh, that's so
So that's how we
clever.
used to communicate back then. Besides the let me write all the reports or waiting for the weekly mail because they would ship out
Yeah.
sometimes new plays and or letters as we got to know each other during training. Um, I'd send you a letter, you'd send me a letter, and it would get forwarded to the following week's host.
Mm-hmm. We
Snail
kept
mail
that
was the thing.
we kept that system up to the end.
Did you?
Yeah. The weekly mail
Oh,
packet. Yeah.
that's outstanding.
So it's so you said right before we hit record on this that 20 years ago you wouldn't have been able to come on and talk about your experiences. Did it take that long to really try to hold on to the really beautiful sparkly moments without the baggage of the really hard stuff?
That's a great way of putting it. In today's culture, for instance, at my church this past summer, I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, USA. I think I forgot to say that. Moved here 2 years ago. We had a series on church hurt and how damaging that can be to individuals. That's kind of how CP was for me in the end. Um, it's like losing a spouse. I lost my spouse 17 years ago, and it took me years to treasure the 23 years I had without feeling that heavy burden of how much I don't have. And
Mm.
with CP, I will always treasure the adventure. I will always treasure, it sounds so bad, most of the people I toured with. Um, I will treasure going to places on earth that I never would have been able to. But when you get down to the human side and the love and the grace and the compassion that you hear drilled into you is not fulfilled. Did I expect Chuck or Bobby or you or me or anybody next to me to be perfect? No. But when it's been ingrained to you for 5 years and I was so young, I was 17. I didn't know anything else. CP was my first job. I didn't have a part time um, McDonald's job or anything like that when I was going through high school because I was so involved in drama and choir and things like that, sports after school. And for the longest time, the negative did outweigh the positive. And
Mm.
it took a lot of soul searching some counseling with not just my pastors, but um, I actually have a, I say well, she's an ex sister in law, but we actually still talk. She too was from Covenant Players. That's how
Oh.
we met. Um, and it it does take a while. When you're that, I think if I had been older, I would have been able to think for myself a little bit more. In hindsight, the way they run you ragged during training
Mm.
from 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight, 7 days a week, in hindsight, maybe not everybody will agree with my opinion. It was a little cultish. And I feel terrible saying that because I do. It took me such a long time to balance and acknowledge. It's okay to acknowledge the adventure. It's okay to acknowledge I did over 10,000 performances and 300 different roles. It's also finally okay to acknowledge without feeling like I was judging that there were some definite flaws. Um, and
Mm.
that's because people are flawed.
Yeah.
I was angry for so long because of how I left and was then told you're persona non grata.
Okay, so let's talk about that because this is a phrase, persona non grata, that I only heard through there was a Yahoo group back before Facebook.
Yahoo group was way before, I
Yeah.
forget who started it, before the Facebook
Yeah,
group.
maybe Sky or somebody.
Could have
Um
been Sky Gleason. He's in Seattle. Him and I talked met a lot.
yeah.
He was in
But
that era with me.
yeah. But so I never heard it. It was not something that was preached to my generation. I joined in
Really?
2005
Okay.
and they didn't talk. They didn't encourage lifetime commitments. They didn't the word PNG never came up. Like it was these were things that they realized like this doesn't work, I think. I
I'm
traveled
glad to hear that.
yeah.
That
I
they gave
traveled with people and because there were people that we were not allowed to stay with, but I traveled with people who said, "We just won't tell the office because I know them and they're awesome and we're gonna stay with them." Um, but
that is so funny you say that because I quietly became a host for a while. Um, I it does bring me a little bit of comfort to hear that in 2005 they weren't really doing what they were doing in the 1970s and 80s.
yeah,
Um,
but for those
I'm
people that don't know about it, that from what I understand, and I guess I should let you explain it, but from what I understand, it basically is you do not leave with our blessing. We will not contact you. No one that we knows you will contact you. You're on your own. Is that it?
you were completely abandoned, and it crushed my relationship with the Lord for years. My identity in Christ was crushed and damaged for years.
Mm.
Um, yes,
Did
I
it?
initially signed up for that year, and then I did another year, and then I was asked to go to Europe. I felt, ooh, but that was a 2 year commitment. And in my third year, which was my first year in Europe, Chuck and Bobby had called and said, God is telling us, and that's how it was always premised. God's telling us it's time you give a lifetime commitment. I was 20 and I was like, wait. I love what I'm doing. There's stories I haven't even shared with you about hardships we had gone through and where the office was like, you're on your own. That's what living by faith out of a suitcase means. And um, it began to go sour then.
Mm.
Um, because I said, you know what? I'm good with the commitment I have now. I don't have a problem looking at it in the future. But because I didn't give the answers they were looking for, and they somehow thought they, that's one thing I think that was one of Chuck's biggest flaws is it wasn't just his way or the highway. He absolutely was a stronger Christian, and God really spoke to him. Do I think God used him in spite of himself, in spite of his humanness, in his writing? Absolutely, I'll always say that. But the way he was so authoritative to the, there were so many of us that joined that year. Our class was like almost 100 recruits. I mean, this was the high time. But when I was in the British Isles, my stepmom, Adrian, God rest her soul, had been diagnosed with cancer. I was with Susan Haroldson. I hope that's okay to mention her name. She had, I think she's still around, um, and a few other people. Um, I see their faces. Steve, somebody or other over there, and I got a call from my dad, and she wasn't expected to live.
Oh.
And we were about 2.5 months into our tour, so I called Chuck and I had a conversation and said, "Look, I need a furlough. I need to go home. I'm not saying I'm not coming back." I explained the situation. I even gave him my father's phone number. And I was told no. Well, I was only 20. By this time, I was 21. And my first thought is, who does he think he is? As much as I have committed to this organization as a job, as it were, it wasn't the military. And he said, if you leave, you are never coming back. And I remember a brutally hard discussion of crying and begging and him getting Bobby on the phone. You're making a huge mistake. And just really trying to mess with me mentally, convince me that's not what God wanted. And I remember the last words I said to them as I said, I don't think God wants me to not be there when my mom passes. And not only did I leave, I had no help. I had no way of getting home. Uh, so my dad, and it was expensive back then. I mean, we're talking 1985 spring. It's still, I found a church in England that the rector was able to get me to Dallas. And I was stranded at Dallas airport and called my dad, who then sent a plane ticket for me. In the end, I got a job, paid that rector back. Just, you don't do that to people.
No.
If you're going to preach, we're a Christian international repertory theater ministry, here to minister, here to search and support and serve and teach. Then you live by that. You don't judge people and say, oh, you've got a family member who may or may not die.
Wow.
She died 6 days after I got home. I will never regret leaving. I regret never being allowed to go back
Mm.
and feeling so completely devalued. and thinking I gave 5 years of my life at times were so difficult where we didn't eat for days, where we slept in the van, or the van was broken down and we had to somehow figure out. And in a moment, I wasn't asking for a vacation. And after a few months of when I call her mom because she certainly was the kind of person who taught me what a mom is supposed to be.
Hmm.
I reached out. I was in California, Northern California. I said, Dad, I'm going to borrow the car. I'm going to go to LA for a few days because I thought it warranted a face to face. I wasn't even allowed in the building.
So you went to the
And
Oxnard headquarters?
correct. And Nancy Friedman, what a wonderful woman. We're in the same Facebook group and we adore each other. And
Oh,
I think those of us that have left, whether good or bad, in that group, it is so important. Um, because she was like, I can't let you in. You could see the angst. I'll never forget that vision. I'm 62. I was 21 40 years ago, and I will never forget the look on her face and the compassion uh, of her wanting me to be able to come in.
wow.
And she says, the best you can do is write a letter. I can't promise you they'll read it or respond. I did write a letter before I left LA, and I get slipped it in through the slot. And I don't have that note. I chose 15-20 years ago to finally at a ceremony, and I burned it in my barbecuer.
Good on you.
Sounds a little strange, but
No.
that's when I found out that I was PNG, persona non grata, and a whole host of reasons. I went against God. I went against Chuck. I went against Bobby. Now, years later, I found out Chuck died. I know that Bobby, if there's any, I know, I think it's only Suzanne and Robin and just a couple of people that really do anything
Yeah.
anymore.
It's one unit. It's not a part
Yeah.
of Covenant Players. It's CP
Oh,
Legacy.
see, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
And it took me not only emotionally and psychologically, do you feel abandoned, but when you're put in that van with those people 24/7, you have bonds that people in the normal world would take years to bond. Love them, hate them, it doesn't matter. And you're just lost.
Mm.
You feel abandoned. And then because I was still such a new Christian, second guessing myself for years. And then I went through some years of a lot of strife in my personal life and blamed myself. It's all because I didn't listen. It's all because it was that ridiculously hard. It took me a long, long time to be able to share an opinion and not have somebody say, you're just stop being critical. You're just being judgmental. You're being legalistic. But that's what they taught us at CB. And it
Uh,
took me years. I look back at it now, and I didn't think I'd get emotional about that time when I left. They didn't have a right to do that.
no.
And for people that have come in later in years or people you might have known, they don't know the harm that caused. I just wanted a little bit of time off, gather myself, and I was totally ready to go back and was rejected. And
Did did it feel like an identity, like a PNG? Did it feel like a scarlet letter on your shirt?
I felt like, actually worse. I felt like it had been, what's branded
Ooh.
across my chest. For years, I had my sash and my medals and my CP
Your medallion?
necklet and medallion. I've since gotten rid of all that too. Um, because what did it really mean?
Mm.
You know, they were more interested in make sure you send all the money home. You keep this amount, but we get all this. If that's not cultish, I don't know what is. Or the
Mm.
way that, you know, where was forgiveness? Where was compassion? Oh,
It makes me think about how some people that don't get it, that have not experienced a rejection like that, are like, I'm not saying this is what other people have, like, I think I've read these kind of sentiments in the thing, like, it was so long ago, why do you still let it bother you? Like, the Covenant player time is different. It's like 1 year is 7 years. It's like you are actually in for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
and a lot of it, I didn't keep up so much years later, so I don't know the average age. But back when I joined in 1980, I joined with Eric and Keith and just so many people. We were barely out of high school. It was that age group of 17 to 21.
Dude, I just realized you're a bunch of hormonal people too.
Oh, yeah. We were kids.
Yeah.
We couldn't even drink. Um, when you're that young and that impressionable, and as you said, CP time was completely different. When I look at training, that that was programming at its finest. And I know that sounds terrible, but that's what it was when you keep people up 7 days a week from they're knocking on your door at 7 in the morning and you're trying to stay awake through evening showcase.
Mm. I
And
want to I want to let you know that by the time we were finishing up our commitment, because we actually are the only people to ever to have twins on the road, but we were mostly home based, so we made it work. Um, but we were having days off on Sundays. We were stopping at like 8, 9 in the evening on even on showcase nights. It was much more humane. Joe and Karen Medley were the supervisors in Europe, and they were wonderful. They made things possible.
yeah, I'm glad I really am glad things
Chilled out.
chilled out because I think in my time in the 70s and 80s, that's why, you know, it,
That's
um,
why
it,
Covenant players died, because they didn't take care of people and let power go crazy.
I think a lot of, some of it sure could be the economy through the years,
Yeah.
people getting burnt out of being the same church every year. But in hindsight, no, I don't even think it was that. It was, let's burn everybody out. Let's not truly support them and treasure the people and the group and the mission versus one man.
Mm. Did you ever have the experience of before in your 5 years that somebody that you cared about became labeled as undesirable and you weren't allowed to contact them?
Yeah.
And how did you handle that?
secretly.
I think a lot of people did that because you're like, no, that's not right. You can't control how I feel and everything I do.
Well, see, it's interesting you say that. That very phrase. You can't tell me how to feel. To this day, I still struggle with that being told how to feel. I bounced from church to church, had a few relationships just go sour before God blessed me with my husband Bruce.
Mm.
The reason that bothers me so much is this past Saturday would have been our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, I'm so
And
sorry.
it is my 40th wedding anniversary. It's just
Yeah.
all I have is a picture. Um,
Mm.
I bounced from church to church. I didn't want to get involved for fear of failure, that perfectionism. People have that are not in the midst of what we went through think, oh, come on, you're just being narcissistic. You just want attention. No, it's not that.
Mm.
It was so ingrained. Dare I even, I'm going to probably step on a few toes, a little bit of brainwashing. When you're that young and you hear it over and over and over and over, no, this is what you need to do. God's telling me. And Chuck was older even then. I mean, I forget how old he was back in the 80s, but even then, oh, he's the wise one. We're supposed to listen to that. You can get caught up in it. Just the last few years, the church that I have found here in Lexington, and they're called Elevate Christian Church. And our mission is simply to elevate people to Christ. That's it. Not with a bunch of extra expectations or labeling or you need to do this or you need to do that. And I finally feel a part of a community just because,
Mm.
not because of the community of CP and what they could get out of us. There were weeks and months where we had great offerings, yet we were only allowed to keep this much, sometimes send thousands, even back then, uh, while we were lucky to get a hamburger.
Yeah.
The balance just wasn't there.
The base stipend for me, until I started getting raises because I was a unit leader, was $14. $14 for the week.
They went down. In 1980, we got $25 each.
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
it's one thing
it
to live
was.
on faith and the hope and generosity of other people, but there's also things like, okay, I need new clothes, new shoes, personal items. We weren't even allowed to take out of that. We had to somehow
Did you not have a
beg
deacons?
stuff
Did
like
you not
that.
have the deacons fund?
No, what's that?
Oh, that was it's a thing fund that Covenant players could kind of like collect their money together, and then there were deacons who would be like, okay, I need some shoes. Oh, but yeah, we can get you some money from the deacons fund to get those shoes.
Oh no, that was not a thing, not that I
Man,
was ever made aware of.
that would have been so good back then when there was so much cash moving around. What would you want to say to other people that are still feeling that brand on them, and people are saying like, get over it, it was so long ago, whatever, but it's not that you've been there. Would.
Been there, done that. What I would say, first, we all process things different.
Mm.
um, I've had to learn to show myself a lot of grace. And I think the biggest lesson I have learned, don't look towards man for answers,
Mm.
because men will always fail us. And I don't mean just men, people. People will fail us. And really, the journey has become, what do you want from me, God? What do you want me to do? And put away the noise. Person A and person B, the angel, the devil, the epitome of died October 20th.
That like, would you say that people can really trust their own heart? Their own intuition, their own connection to God.
With a lot of work and a lot of prayer. In my case, and it took me years to find it, the right professional.
Mm.
Um, it wasn't just the spiritual component, it was the emotional, psychological. And I have been especially blessed these last 2 years, but in the past, with a Christian therapist who is removed enough from church, removed enough from many of my family and friends, but there to really help that healing journey. Because short of that healing journey, I would always still be questioning, did my life become so suffering because I didn't listen to Chuck?
Mm.
Because I didn't do this? We have to learn. I've had to learn what I encourage anybody who's got any partial of a story of PNG, persona non grata. We have to find our own value again within ourselves, find our purpose, and really only seek 100% my relationship with God, because it went up, down, backwards, sideways. I even walked away for a while. And unless you've walked it, the old phrase, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Mm.
Um, it was my identity for so long. Not good enough, rejection, abandonment. I had a blood family who does that to me on the regular. I don't have to be anybody's doormat. You don't have to be anybody's doormat. We deserve to be happy. We deserve to have that grace, that self compassion. But it will take a lot of hard work.
Mm.
Um, just as losing, um, I'm looking over to my left to painting from Maui before the fires.
Oh.
It's where my husband and I used to go. It's where he first told me he loved me and asked me to marry him.
Oh.
Looking at that, it's kind of like CP. There's times I look at it and I just feel the pain and the anguish. The difference with the healing journey, even with this past week, is I can look at it and smile and go, I did have those good times. And when you can finally do that, then my judgment changes. And even in my judging of Chuck and Bobby and everybody back then, I finally forgave myself, asked forgiveness because of how angry I was at them and how could you do this, to I still travel the world and I got to see some incredible places that I'll never get that chance. So it's just, it won't happen overnight because, as you said earlier, CP time, five
It's
years, let's see, 2, 4, 10, 11, 13 tours in that time, plus summer, CPCC. That's intense.
Yeah.
And that's all you know. That's your bubble,
Yeah.
to where now I'm part of the team at church, and I actually run audio visual, um, which is kind of ironic because I'm visually and hearing impaired. Um, but I run audio visual. I'm part of the team, and they're nothing but grateful. And they don't point out if my timing's wrong on the worship song, with, oh, okay, wait a minute, okay, because we have a live band and you got to get that timing right because what you see on the computer is not what's down there. And they're never critical
Mm.
and they're supportive. I think that's the shortest answer I can give to your question.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I've had to go through, and that's what I would say to others,
Mm.
and be part of a community as our Facebook, where, David and Don Ingram are part of the administrators of our private Facebook group, and they are careful. We don't usually talk politics. We don't even usually talk religion, and they're very careful about allowing us to have a voice.
Mm. Yeah.
That's what we didn't have. We weren't allowed our own voice if it didn't match. That's conditioning.
Yeah.
And to finally have that, it's okay. You're allowed, you're entitled to feel like you feel, and respectfully, without putting somebody else down, I get to say how I feel.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say to people watching this that toured with you, that remember you?
Uh, I am so grateful that in a flash, I remember. Um, Unfortunately, we've lost a few along the way. Uh, that's where social media can be good or bad. Depends how you look at it. Um, if I'm disciplined, social media is a wonderful place, um, because I remember Sky when he had more hair. I remember me when I wasn't gray, uh, or Jerry Lynn or Jay, Walt Bauer. God, rest in peace. All of our clouds of witnesses. Even though there was that struggle and the bad side of things, the tough side of things, it's the I've said the traveling was cool, and it was, won't deny it. It was the people. I just, it's almost visually, even though I see them on Facebook. Ruth Carter, she lives in Canada. It's like a throwback in time. You see an old picture. Peter and Janice Iverson just had I forget, I think a 40th something anniversary. And they put some old pictures on of Peter having these huge long sideburns. And it throws you back into those happy memories of, wow, we really dressed like that, or we did that, or um, I'll forever treasure those moments. And I continue to be grateful for those of us that, not just in the Facebook group, but have friended each other. And, we may not see each other too much, uh, but we've had a couple of lives, and, you know, being able to finally look back and go, yeah, it was hard. It's a part of me, and I've come across the other side. And I continue to treasure those people back in the day, as we call it. We're the old timers. You're the youngsters, um, and I'll always have that connection.
Mm. That's lovely. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing parts of your story. And thank you to those of you who are listening and just taking this in. Just remember to have so much love for yourself, for however you left Covenant players. It's even for those of there's some of us that don't have any faith at all, and it's really hard to untangle from the faith that we experienced on the road to losing it because of experiences. Like, just love yourself, and we can just trust that with the help that comes in, we can come out on the other side.
Absolutely. And I can't
There's not a
thank
right
you.
or wrong way to do it.
Absolutely. For each of us, it really is. As I said earlier, we all process things different,
Yeah.
and some people were never believers. They just love theater.
Yeah.
But I can't thank you enough for stepping up and wanting to do something like this, because even though we've talked about it uh, in private groups on Facebook and back in the day, Yahoo, to have this ability to put a face next to a fellow CPer and to be able to finally say, maybe this was the last missing piece. Because I was nervous, not in the sense of I've done my fair share of Zoom, and been in front of people. That's not an issue, but I feel a certain weight's been lifted today, and I want to thank you for that and your willingness to talk to total strangers. Uh, that we only know each other because we see each other on quote unquote Facebook. Um, because I feel a little less branded today.
Oh,
Thank you for that.
that's wonderful. Got tears in my eyes. It's just such a wonderful thing to be a part of.
Well, blessings on you. And for anybody listening, take from it what you will. Take the positive, take the negative, throw it away. However, you do it, just do you.
Yeah, I
Thank you
concur.
so much, Kate.
Thank you. So, the way that I end my conversations is I give hugs.
Hug, 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 hug. Oh.
Hug. So,
Oh, that way. Okay, sorry. I hear I was reaching around. Okay, there you go. Bye bye. God bless everybody.
I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Sheri, being willing to be on and to be so vulnerable and authentic about her experiences. She's such a beautiful person with such a power to her story. It's not everyone who's able to hold on to their faith and through all of that, and not everyone should be expected to be, where all of our paths are valid. And I truly meant it when I said that there is no right way or wrong way to process this. Okay, I guess there's a wrong way if it involves being hurtful to others, but I think you know what I mean. Whenever I'm recording a conversation, I just take so many notes. And one of the things that I wrote down that she said that was just so beautiful to me was, I will always treasure the adventure. I'm so happy with her that she found a non-critical support system. And I hope you have that in your life too. I hope that if you are listening to this as a former Covenant player or former missionary, former religious person, wherever you may be and have experienced a big transition in your life, I hope that you've had the right people in your life to help you know that it's okay and let you talk it through and find healing. And most importantly, I hope that you have found or are finding a way to forgive yourself of anything that has gone on that has felt like a brand on your body. This conversation, just how the way that she said at the end that it felt like a weight was lifted, that this was a last step of her healing journey. It was amazing, such an amazing feeling. If you're watching this on video on YouTube, you might have noticed me kind of gesturing out off the screen because my husband came in. I was like, dude, I'm in the middle of an emotional part here. And it turns out that we were running late for a parent-teacher conference type situation, and he was trying to get my attention. So that's what that was. But if you've listened this far to these ramblings, I've gone past the hour mark. Oh boy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here. Please, please leave a comment to tell me when you were in the organization, if you were, of course, you don't have to make something up. I would love to hear your story in real life or in podcast form. I'm so happy to connect and have the honor of helping people tell their stories. As an interviewer, it's such a special thing to grow in that ability to ask the right question and follow my intuition in that. So I'll stop rambling now, I promise. Thank you so much for being here. Hugs! I'm so glad you're still here. Please like this video, share it with a friend, and be sure to subscribe. Bye!